That's odd.
Report suspicious activities.
It's raining today.
I appeal to you all to look at this picture. This was my daughter. Remember her face.
Away from the shadows of Tokyo's bustling streets, there is a man with a cult following living a quiet life. He changes into fresh clothes daily and replaces worn articles of clothing with new items every month. Almost 2 decades after a seemingly innocent encounter spiraled into a horrifying tale that shook the world, he has released a best-selling memoir, and his infamy turned into a movie. His claim to infamy? A crime so bizarre and tragic, it united 2 nations in shock and despair as he evaded a world manhunt for years. Thousands of sightings, strange rumors of wigs and cross-dressing, and even Yakuza involvement. Yet he was a ghost. How? By deforming his face himself with scissors and a knife, and several rounds of plastic surgery to change his appearance. A man with 1,000 faces. He is Tatsuya Ichihashi. Ichihashi was born in Ichikawa, Chiba Prefecture on January 5, 1979 to a wealthy family. His mother was a dentist, and his father a brain surgeon. Failing to follow in his father's footsteps, he settled for a degree in horticulture from Chiba University. Despite his education, he never worked in the field. He simply lived off his parents' dime. However, beneath this facade of privilege lurked a troubled soul. Accounts from his college peers painted a picture of social isolation and a concerning obsession with violent manga. Though his girlfriend described him as serious and stable, he had previously mugged a woman in the street and was given a formal warning for stalking. Allegedly, his father paid the woman 1 million yen to settle the matter outside of court. Oddly, Ichihashi was obsessed with physical fitness, spending countless hours working out. Yet despite this regimen, his mental health deteriorated. He told friends that he was feeling unstable, but no one urged him to seek professional help, leaving him to grapple with his demons alone. And he was developing a twisted fixation on a stranger, a 22-year-old English language teacher from the UK, Lindsay Hawker.
This is my favourite street because I like the old style.
It was a thirst for adventure that brought Lindsay Hawker to Japan. Born on December 30th, 1984, Lindsay grew up in Coventry, England, one of 3 sisters. After graduating from Leeds University with a first-class honors grade in biology in 2006, she decided she wanted to take a year off to travel with her boyfriend, Ryan Garside, before her master's degree. They made plans for a world tour, but in October that year, she landed a job teaching English at Japan's Nova Teaching School, thus delaying their plans. The new plan was for Ryan to join her the following summer. So, off she set sail to the land of the rising sun, alone, never to experience another English summer. Upon her arrival in Japan, Lindsay was assigned to Koiwa, a district in Edogawa, Tokyo. She settled further east in the neighboring city of Chiba, a slightly distant but more cost-effective locale, with 2 fellow Nova teachers. Despite the distance, she made sure to keep in regular contact with her family and boyfriend back home. According to them, she was fully immersed in the rhythm of her new life and savored each moment. Unbeknownst to them, an unhinged 28-year-old was set to cross paths with her 6 months into her stay. That fateful day, Lindsay would say goodbye to her roommates and leave their apartment, to never return. "You are my English teacher." This was Ichihashi's first words to Lindsay. After her usual work routine, on March 24, 2007, she had taken the train back to Chiba Station, where she usually kept her bicycle. Whilst unlocking her bike, she was approached from behind by Ichihashi, who greeted her with those fateful words. Knowing that he wasn't one of her students, she politely left the conversation and got on her bicycle to ride back to her apartment. Ichihashi followed suit. but when she sped up her pace, he ran after her. As she tried to get away from him, he kept asking questions like, "Where are you from?" and "Where did you study?" Failing to shake him off, she finally stopped, outside her apartment. He asked if she'd be willing to give him English lessons. He offered to meet in a public cafe so she was comfortable. However, Lindsay refused as she was already too busy with her work, with hardly any free time to herself. Disappointed but undeterred, he then asked if she'd be so kind as to give him a glass of water as he was thirsty. From chasing her down. The audacity. Reluctantly, Lindsay agreed and let him in. To her credit, and rather poignantly in retrospect, she wanted her housemates to see his face in case it came up again in the future. And she also wanted to show him that she didn't live alone. Once inside, Ichihashi asked Lindsay for lessons again. Only this time, he said he'd pay her 3,500 yen an hour. As fate would have it, Lindsay accepted his offer as it was easy money and planned to meet at a cafe a few days later. Before leaving, he took out a pen and a piece of paper and started scribbling. To her surprise, when he passed it to her, it was a drawing of her with his name and number on it. Saturday, March 24, 2007, Lindsay and Ichihashi had their first and last lesson together in a local coffee shop. CCTV footage captured them conversing together in the queue to buy a drink. While Lindsay didn't look uncomfortable, she made an effort to keep distance between the two of them. In the footage, you can see her stepping away from him whenever he got too close. At the end of the hour-long lesson, Ichihashi expressed that he had forgotten to bring the money to pay her and that she could come by his apartment to pick it up as he only lived half a mile down the road. Lindsay acquiesced and they got into a taxi. Once at Ichihashi's home, Lindsay requested for the driver to wait as she wouldn't be long and had to go to work that afternoon. The driver accepted and both Ichihashi and Lindsay disappeared into the building. After several minutes, when she hadn't returned, the driver assumed she had changed her plans. And so, the last person to see Lindsay alive left, and whatever ensued in the apartment forever lost into the heart of darkness. When Lindsay neither turned up to work nor returned home, her roommates called the police to report her missing, but unfortunately, they didn't take it seriously. Only on the following Monday, March 26th, when she didn't clock into work again, and the Nova School staff called them, did the police spring into action. The school then contacted her parents in England to inform them their daughter was missing. Immediately, Bill Hawker booked a ticket for Tokyo to find his beloved daughter, unaware of the nightmare beginning to unfold. The police search for Lindsay started at her apartment. When they questioned her roommates, they brought up the strange man she had a lesson with 2 days ago. They handed over the sketch of Lindsay with his details on them. At 5:40 p.m. on the day the Nova School reported her missing, 2 police officers were dispatched to Ichihashi's apartment. When they knocked on the door, nobody answered. However, Ichihashi's neighbors let them onto their balcony so they could peer into his living room. All the lights were off, but someone definitely seemed to be lurking inside. They also noticed a bathtub on his balcony, which they found merely curious, because at that point, the officers assumed Lindsay was simply being held hostage in the apartment and immediately called for backup. 3 hours and 9 officers later, a raid of his home was planned. But just as they were about to charge into the apartment, Ichihashi opened the door with a rucksack in hand. He took advantage of the officers' panic and stormed past all 9 of them. In an attempt to grab him, they managed to snatch his rucksack, but he managed to get away and disappeared into the night, barefoot, leaving behind a gruesome crime scene and a computer with a peculiar voice recording. Back at the crime scene, officers approached the bathtub they'd seen earlier. It was completely filled with soil and sand. Nothing too strange, right? Well, a small white hand was protruding from the mixture. It was Lindsay's right hand, hanging out of the tub, with her body naked underneath the soil and sand. Ichihashi had put a decomposition agent in the soil mixture and put flower seed on top to disguise it as a flower bed. He had shaved all of Lindsay's hair off and put it in a plastic bag. Police also found multiple women's wigs scattered around, which led them to believe he was a crossdresser. When this became public knowledge, rumors started to circulate that he killed her to make her hair into a wig, but this was never confirmed. Autopsy showed that Lindsay's upper body was bruised, suggesting that she had been subjected to a prolonged attack. Egg-sized bruises indicated they were inflicted with a fist. Both Ichihashi and Lindsay knew martial arts, but Ichihashi was a more experienced fighter, with a black belt. Lindsay fought bravely, but alas, Ichihashi proved more powerful. Other marks on her upper body suggested collisions with furniture, which Ichihashi's neighbors would later corroborate in court. Ultimately, the autopsy indicated Ichihashi most likely strangled her and broke the cartilage in her neck, leaving her dead. On March 27th, the Hawker family received the dreaded call: a body had been found. By the next morning, Ichihashi was officially a wanted man. After fleeing from his apartment, he wandered around Tokyo with no money. He covered his face under masks and wore hats and glasses, carefully avoiding eye contact and surveillance cameras. He didn't contact any family members either, reports stated. The police distributed 30,000 wanted posters of Ichihashi throughout the country. His face was blasted on several news outlets multiple times a day, but nothing came of it. With zero leads, police released photoshopped pictures of Ichihashi in wigs, just in case he was out in drag and nobody had recognized him. They even released life-size cutouts of Ichihashi to raise awareness. Again, nothing came of this. The trail had gone cold. 2 months after Lindsay's death, her family arrived in Japan to assist in raising awareness to find Ichihashi because they believed the police were getting lazy in their searches. Her father even befriended members of the infamous Yakuza with bottles of whiskey to ask for assistance in finding his daughter's killer. Eventually, and unsurprisingly, the media turned the spotlight on the police to question their competence. How did 9 officers fail to apprehend one man? Why did they take a month to question vital witnesses? Even more damning, did they know their wanted picture was 7 years out of date? With tensions at an all-time high, the police and Lindsay's family started to publicly argue, which led to the heavy involvement of both British and Japanese media.
Why hasn't he been caught? And what do they think, or where do they think they can look, or what can they do to try and bring this man out, to draw this rat out of his hole, because he must be hiding somewhere?
In response, the Japanese National Police Agency raised the cash reward for information leading to Ichihashi's arrest from 1 to 10 million yen. All while this was happening, Ichihashi had traveled across most of the country, ranging from Aomori, the most northern city in Japan, to the most southern island of Okinawa. While passing a police station, he had seen a wanted poster with his moles prominently featured. So, using a box cutter, he sliced a mole off his left cheek. This would be the start of his twisted strategy, self-mutilation of his face to disguise his identity. From 2008 to 2009, Ichihashi hid in Osaka, 250 miles west of Tokyo. He slept in internet cafes and World War-era bunkers. During that period, he would cut off his lower lip with scissors to make it look thinner. His first attempt was unsuccessful because of unbearable pain, but he finished the job a few days later in a public bathroom. Next, his nose. He cut it up and bound it up with a needle and thread to make it look thinner. Still convinced it was a solid plan of evasion, he decided he needed professional plastic surgery to disguise himself fully. So, using the name and address of a dead person, he got work with a construction company in Ibaraki, Osaka, to fund his operations. He saved 1 million yen and spent most of it on 2 plastic surgery operations for which he also gave false names and addresses. However, in October 2009, a visit to a clinic for yet another cosmetic operation to make his nose bridge higher became his undoing. He traveled to Nagoya, where a plastic surgeon, suspicious about his patient after seeing unusual facial scars, informed police that he believed he'd worked on Ichihashi recently. He sent a before and after photo, which Ichihashi had foolishly agreed to. This photo was quickly released to the public, a decisive moment. A colleague from the construction site Ichihashi worked at immediately recognized him and informed police. And so, 2 years, 7 months, and 8,000 reported sightings later, on the 10th of November 2009, Ichihashi rushed to Nanko Ferry Port in Sumino, Osaka, to make a run for Okinawa, to become a ghost again. All he had to do was not be recognized on the ferry for 3 days, and he would have gotten away again. It was 6:30 p.m. A staff member of the port saw a curious figure on the second-floor waiting room. The lone figure was wearing a white jacket, dark knit hat, a mask, and sunglasses. Suspicious of how he bore a striking resemblance to the killer with 1,000 faces, he called the police. Officers rushed to the scene, and when asked for his name, he said, "Yes, it is me, Tatsuya Ichihashi." On July 4th, 2011, as the entire world watched, Ichihashi's trial began. At the start of each day's proceedings, and each time he was brought in after a break, he performed a deep bow to Lindsay's parents as a gesture of apology. But Mr. and Mrs. Hawker turned their faces away. Prior to his trial, Ichihashi wrote a 4-page handwritten letter to the family where he expressed, "There is no one to blame but me. I will take responsibility. I will never forget about her and what I did to her and you. And I will carry my cross until the moment of my death. I am very sorry. I not only destroyed her life, but I also changed your lives. What I did to her and you will never be forgiven. I was evil." Lindsay's family rejected the letter as a ploy to secure leniency, as in Japan, defendants can get shorter sentences if the victim's family accepts their apology. Instead, they requested that the court show no mercy and give him the death penalty. Her mother, Julia, told The Times, "He was trying to escape and to change what he looked like with plastic surgery and to remain free for the rest of his life. We just want justice for Lindsay, and we have faith in the Japanese justice system. There isn't any point in him or his defense team getting in touch with us." During the first hearing of the trial, interrupted by sobs, Ichihashi admitted assaulting Lindsay. In his testimony, a weeping Ichihashi told the court, "Yes, I raped her. Yes, I agree that Lindsay died because of my actions, but I did not mean to kill her. Only Lindsay and I know what really happened that day, but she can no longer speak for herself because of me. It is my responsibility to tell the truth throughout this trial." Speaking of the moment when he had to identify his daughter's corpse, Mr. Hawker said, "When I saw her, I knew it was Lindsay. She was my daughter. She was so tall and beautiful, but she was beaten so badly. My life and my soul just fell beneath me." Deliberation didn't last long, as Ichihashi admitted he enticed Lindsay into his home. Shaking, he said he was responsible for her death. He strangled her to stop her crying out because he was afraid his neighbors would hear her scream and get him in trouble, but did not intend to kill her, a defense which was rejected by the judges and jurors. Most of the media coverage from this time was around how the court system would punish him, as Japan still enforced the death penalty. Although Japan has death by hanging for murder, it is usually reserved for serial killers, so Lindsay's family and the prosecution instead sought a life sentence, the maximum punishment for his crimes. Finally, on the 21st of July 2009, Ichihashi was sentenced to a life sentence, serving a minimum of 10 years before the possibility of parole. The final ruling stated that Lindsay died soon after entering his apartment and putting up a brave fight, adding that there was no evidence for Ichihashi's claims that he had attempted to resuscitate her and called an ambulance. It was concluded that, shortly after he entered his apartment, the defendant administered strong blows to the victim, especially around her right eye. He also assaulted other parts of her body and used tape to bind her to stop her resisting when he assaulted her. After their years-long suffering, ending with Ichihashi's sentencing, Mr. Hawker said,
"We've waited a long time for today. We've waited 4.5 years to get justice for Lindsay, and we have achieved that today, and we're very pleased."
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Through every minute of the trial, Mr. and Mrs. Hawker sat just a few yards from the man accused of assaulting and murdering their daughter. Every word of the case, including the detail of their daughter's last hours and gruesome death, was relayed to them by an interpreter. After the judge delivered the guilty verdict and sentencing, the Hawkers simply looked at each other and nodded. In 2012, Ichihashi appealed his sentencing. His lawyers argued that he was sentenced too harshly and repeated the absurd claim that the death was accidental, as he was just trying to muffle Lindsay's screams. Fortunately, the Tokyo High Court upheld the original sentencing. However, he continued to torment Lindsay's family. In 2011, he published his memoir, Until I Was Arrested, which detailed his time on the run. In it, he distastefully wrote about how he toured temples on the southwestern island of Shikoku in hopes that Lindsay would come back to life. But, conveniently, nothing about what took place in Lindsay's final moments of her fight for survival was present, something that could have actually brought further closure to her family. Absurdly, he described the book as a gesture of contrition, adding that he wanted royalties to go to Lindsay's family or a charity. Her family refused all offers of money. Sadly, to no one's surprise, the book was wildly popular, selling over 100,000 copies. And to make things even more ludicrous, the book was adapted into a film in 2013 called I Am Ichihashi, The Journal of a Killer. But the first and final question remains, where is Ichihashi? Japan's prisons are very much like black holes. Little information about what happens inside ever gets out. One of the few sources of information are from those who have been released. Such is the case of 44-year-old Hiroshi, who in April 2023 was paroled from Nagano prison after spending 14 months there. Nagano prison incarcerates convicts into two categories: Class A, mainly first-time offenders, and Class B, serious and repeat offenders. One Class B resident at Nagano is Ichihashi, now aged 45. As Hiroshi relates, Ichihashi had been assigned to work at plant number 10. I'm not certain what that section does, but another convict who was at the same plant was transferred to the laundry, where I worked. He told me Ichihashi tended to be aloof, only engaging with those with whom he felt comfortable. Among the hearsay about Ichihashi concerned the prison's annual undokai, sports meet. He heard that Ichihashi's legs are ridiculously fast. In the relay races, he was able to outrun everyone else, and many prisoners cheered him on, shouting, "Ichihashi, gambare." While working at the laundry division, Hiroshi was in charge of washing and sewing inmates' underwear, shirts, socks, and work clothes. He relayed, "When the clothes bearing Ichihashi's number came to us, some of the other prisoners were nasty, intentionally sewing on his number tag very crudely and inappropriately. One day, I made a neat job of sewing on his tag and continued doing so afterwards. Then, about 2 months later, he started writing Ichihashi in neat characters above the number on his laundry bag. I think he probably realized that it was carefully stitched and started writing out his surname as a way of showing his appreciation. At the time Hiroshi entered the prison, he deposited 100,000 yen with the prison authorities. In Ichihashi's case, while the specifics of the amount are unknown, hearsay has it that he probably has about 1 million yen in deposit. Like the perpetrators of other notorious cases, such as the Sagamihara mass murder incident and the assassination of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, fanatic supporters are believed to have made donations. According to Hiroshi, Ichihashi seems to have many passionate fans. And even though during an interview right after he was apprehended, Ichihashi's parents expressed deep empathy and sympathy for Lindsay and her family. It's been noted that they make monthly visits. Despite the 30 minutes deducted from his prison earnings and fund for his parents' visits, Ichihashi seems unfazed by the loss, thanks to his substantial funds from donations. He often splurges on new underwear and socks, maintaining a routine of changing into fresh clothes daily. He keeps a stockpile of 7 sets of clothes for each day of the week, replacing worn items every 1 or 2 months. So much for contrition. Thankfully, his chances of being paroled anytime soon is very, very slim. According to Article 28 of the Penal Code, parole can be granted after 10 years from the date of the sentence, which in Ichihashi's case would have been granted in 2019. In practice, however, the process takes considerably longer. In 2021, only 9 inmates in all of Japan were granted parole. That is approximately 0.5% of the total number of inmates serving life terms. So, going by the average 32 years and 10 months for a life term incarceration, Ichihashi is likely to have almost 20 years left to serve, at the very least, before parole is even considered again. He would be 65 then. Meanwhile, since their 22-year-old daughter's death, Mr. and Mrs. Hawker continuously traveled to Japan, appearing on television and handing out leaflets in train stations, even after spending their entire savings and pension funds to make sure their daughter's killer was caught. All they wanted then was justice for Lindsay, which they fortunately got, and now, and forever, for her to be remembered for her spirit.
We all loved her. I'd like you to raise a glass for a daughter a dad would be proud of anywhere in the world. Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Thank you.
To brave Lindsay,